Howdy brewers. Well, I think it's pretty obvious what we've got planned for today. It's my first beer I've put down for a while. But yeah, so I was getting to that time of the year for the Cooper's vintage ale that was coming out, and I luckily got onto the Cooper's website and got this year's recipe pack. The hops aren't here. They're in the freezer. I've had this a couple of days, and yeah, I just don't want them losing too much of their hoppy goodness. So that's why they're not there. But there's 2 bags of hops in there. There's Huel, Melon, and Eldorado hops. And I don't know if you've tried this year's vintage ale. I've had one glass and it's really nice, so I'm really happy with it. I'm very keen to make it. First thing I have to do is crack some grain. If you've never bought a Cooper's Recipe of the Month kit, it's great that they come with the instructions, especially for if you're just starting out with your brewing. Takes out all the guesswork. So I've got some water that I'm bringing up to 70 degrees Celsius that I will steep when I crush it, steep the malt for 40 minutes, and then we'll bring it to the boil and add the hops. But I'll take you through the brew day anyway. So without further ado, I'll get on to the brew day. Cheers. With the extract with steeping grains brews, this is one of the sort of easiest ways to keep the grain in the water without having to worry about sort of sparging or anything like that. This is a fresh chucks out of the packet. I don't want to muck around with this any longer, so 2 chucks will do. And yeah, that just goes straight into the well, mash water, I guess, to steep for 40 minutes. Okay, it's been 40 minutes. The grains have taken on a lot of water. I like to let it drain a little bit. I also don't mind doing a tiny bit of a sparge. This is just some water I had in a jar weighing down the grains. Just to make sure they didn't float. So, now we need to bring this to the boil for 5 minutes. And then we'll steep these delicious hops. Okay, we've got it boiling. We're going to boil it for about 5 minutes. The reason why we boil it for 5 minutes is to make sure we kill any bugs that may have gone in during the steeping process, and it'll be sterilised water or sterilised wort, and it makes it much better to brew with. I am going to throw in some yeast nutrient with this one, because I'm using some recultured Cooper's ale yeast from some Cooper's Pale Ales. And if you want to know how I reculture that particular yeast, I'll put a link at the end of the video, but also a tag at one of these corners, so you can understand how it's done. Alright, it's been 5 minutes. Take it off the heat, add the hops. Oops, sorry about the camera work. Mobile setting. Alright, yeah, so that's 20 minutes steeping, and then it'll be time to mix all the ingredients. This part is pretty self-explanatory. This is just adding the ingredients while the hops are steeping. And I'll get some boiling water and get rid of all, dissolve all the rest of that malt extract, if you can see it. So with this recipe is wheat malt extract. So give it a smoother mouthfeel, maybe a tighter head. This recipe also calls for 1 kilo of dextrose. I'll just leave that for the time being, until the 20 minutes is up. Just got the strainer there for the hops. And now to top up with cold water to the 21 litre mark. And as I said before, this is the recultured Cooper's Ale yeast. We will ferment that as close to 18 degrees as we can. Before I sign off, I just thought I'd give a quick review to that Brewmakers or Beermakers Australian Bitter, and this is it here. It's really clear, really tight head. It's a really nice beer. I can understand why it's the most popular kit at the brew store, but I must say I prefer the Morgan's Australian Bitter of all the Australian bitters that you can still buy. My favourite one ever was the old Thomas Cooper Select Australian Bitter. That was my favourite, and when they stopped making that, and they say you can remake it with a Cooper's Canadian Blonde, that's okay, but it's nowhere near as good. But the flavours of this, just what you want. It's just like, it tastes like a mainstream beer. It's using the Australian Special Bitter brew blend, just gives it a little bit more of a hoppy kick, and it really gives it a it's like a what would you, like a Victoria Bitter, Tooheys New, 4X Bitter, Great Northern, Iron Jack, but it's very similar to those, but it's got a bit more malt and it's more bitter. But you know, in terms of its balance, that's how balanced it is. So it's a really good beer if you can get hold of it and you like your bitters. Use it. I'd recommend though buying the 3470 or whatever your favourite lager yeast is. Don't go with the kit yeast. Alright, well, till next time, happy brewing.